Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the September 2021 edition of the Historic District Commission for the City of Westminster. I'll begin the agenda with the call to order by reading the Statement of Authority. The Westminster Historic District Commission derives its authority from Chapter 164, Article 9A of the City Code, which is authorized by Maryland Code Annotated Land Use Article Division 1, Single Jurisdiction Planning and Zoning Title 8, Historic Preservation. Qualifications of the Westminster Historic District Commission are on file at the City Administrative Building, 56 West Main Street. The file is open to the public. Did anyone get a chance to review the meeting minutes for the July meeting?
Yes, I make a motion. We accept the minutes as written.
Okay. Do I hear a second?
Second.
Okay, I hear Christine second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, motion carries. Minutes are approved. Thank you. That brings us to our, there's no old business for this month's discussion. That brings us to new business, item 4 on the agenda. Item A, application for, looks like a pre-construction application for historic rehabilitation property tax credits. Andrew, would you care to provide us some context for this?
Absolutely. The property located at 12 North Church Street is an eligible property per the city code. According to the cost estimate, the applicant proposes to, number 1, remove, scrape, and repair 17 existing shutters. To number 2, to scrape, caulk, and paint all windows and frames. And the total estimated cost of the project is $9,875. Please be advised the information provided does not include an MHIC contractor license. Let me pull up the photos in the application. The staff recommendation is subject to the applicant providing an MHIC contractor license for Jeff Richardson Home Improvement and Remodeling Services. Staff recommends that the commission review and provide application and attachments. The commission review the provided application and attachments to determine whether, number 1, the proposed work as outlined above qualifies as eligible work under the city code. The estimated project cost of $9,875 is accurate and acceptable. The property is an eligible property. And lastly, to approve and grant the certificate of eligibility for a historic tax credit in the amount of up to $987.50, consistent with the city code sections. If you have any questions, Mr. Chair, please let me know. And I can, if anybody needs to see any part of this application, the pre-construction application, I can move this on the screen for you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
All right, thank you, Andrew. So I did want to go through the application and just get anyone else's comments. Kevin, did you have any input on the application that was submitted?
I was okay with everything, except I too was aware of no contractor's number. So that's kind of worried me, because I thought that we said we would consider anything with, maybe I'm wrong, I thought the regulations said you had to provide a number, a part of the application.
Andrew, do you know if that is required as part of the application, or was that something that the HDC has traditionally recommended based on committee preference?
Not that I'm aware of, Mr. Chair.
Okay. So Kevin, I agree with you. It does, when you tend to see a quote without an actual contracting license, it tends to raise an eyebrow or two. But again, it doesn't seem like it's required. So I think we can proceed, but if we would like, we can certainly approve with considerations as you suggested. Josh, how about yourself? Do you have any comments on the or concerns, anything you wanted to raise for the application?
No, I don't think so. I think one thing I will just note is that there have been times where we've asked other applicants to provide multiple, bids, and I don't see that here unless I missed it. So that was my only observation.
No, I agree. We do want to make sure that we're being fair and consistent in our enforcement of these guidelines. And if another quote, at least one more, could be provided, that would certainly be certainly help us feel justified in the approval of the tax credit. Christine, I know you're relatively new to the process, but have you had a chance to look over the application? Does anything stick out at you? Did you have any questions?
No, it looked pretty straightforward and simple, but this is the first one that I've actually had to take a look at. So, but Kevin, that is a good point. Is there any, I don't remember if there's anywhere on the application where you can list the different quotes from different contractors or not? Can't we just ask where that quote came from?
I believe there was, yeah, so there was a work order. It just looked like a very simple, basic invoice. What page is that? Page number 8 in the application. But yeah, so typically what would happen is when we ask for multiple quotes, they would just attach them one after the other in the same application. So, she had company A, company B, company C, they would just be listed one after the other. The quotes would just be appended to the existing application. Does anyone want to make a motion for approval or denial? First, before we do that, I'll go through. Does anybody have any other concerns that they, during our discussion, that they came up with? Okay. Anyone want to make a motion?
I make a motion, we accept the application, but also see if we can get, they may have a contractor's number, just inadvertently did not include it. To me, that also is a protection for the homeowner too, because then you have a reliable history of work they have performed and have a way of checking all their references.
Agreed. Yes, it's important, especially if you're doing work in a historic context. In my personal opinion, again, this is not HDC guidelines or city code, but my personal opinion, it would be best done by a licensed and bonded contractor as opposed to someone that is like an unlicensed handyman, for example. But I do agree with you, Kevin. Those are assurances that we provide, that we would like to see provided for our homeowners that are trying to do a historic improvement. So that's a very good point made. Did anyone have anything else they wanted to add?
I would just emphasize my prior point of, maybe this is conversation we can have after we talk about this particular application, but I feel like we didn't totally reach a resolution on the last time we talked this about if we want to make it our best guidelines to ask for multiple bids. And after tonight, I would love to have us all in agreement on whether that is something that we are expecting or not. Just again, so that we are consistent in the way that we interface with people that bring these applications forward.
That's a great idea. And I think maybe after we discuss this application, we can go into that in a little more detail and make that an official agenda item for possibly reviewing the HTC charter for next month's meeting. Possibly add that into any applications that we're approving. We definitely want to see, unless I think we have to make sure that we're also including people that are trying to do right by the community. So if they happen to be doing a particular task that is, say, a one-off, that maybe there's not a lot of contractors that would accept such a job. Maybe there's so much rot in a particular piece of wood or molding that they just said, absolutely not, no way. So one quote is the best they could do. That's where we would be best in engaging the actual applicant themselves and saying, would you mind joining this call and explaining this application in a little more detail so we can understand why either A, the cost is so high, or maybe there's only one quote included in the application, that sort of thing. So we want to make sure that we're following best practices and being consistent in our enforcement, but we also give people the ability to improve the community without making them have to jump through 18 or 19 hoops just because they want to make their house pretty. I mean, we have to walk that fine line. So I know, Josh, I agree with you completely. We want to make sure that it's codified in an official way. So let's talk about that a little bit further. But for now, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the application with stipulations that a second quote be provided or an explanation for the single quote? Oh, I'm sorry, Andrew, go ahead.
If I may add, I'm just trying to put this all together. So when I return to the office tomorrow, just to make, taking what the commission's action tonight and putting it into reality and making it happen. I'm just trying to think if right now, if you all make a decision to approve with the condition of getting another quote, and once the applicant receives and provides the city another quote, if that quote comes in at less money than this quote before you, this is totally your decision, but like what the BZA does of continuance, and I see Mr. Depot.
Yeah, I think these are separate discussions.
If we're following the application procedures, it does state that the applicant or applicant's authorized agent must appear at all meetings at which the application is scheduled to be considered. In the absence of any personal appearance on behalf of the applicant, the commission will either continue the application until the next meeting or deny the application. So by the procedures, the commission only has two options in this case: either continue it until an authorized person or agent is available for the meeting or deny the application.
Okay. Thank you very much for that clarification. So I think in that case, does anyone feel strongly enough to deny the application? I see a lot of people shaking their heads. So I think that this application is best moved to the next discussion where the applicant can make an appearance. I think that would be more beneficial for the applicant and for the historic district. So
Also, Andrew, any direction with the applicant, can we ask if there's a number for the contractor and make that part of a suggestion besides other shown written appraisals or quotes. My understanding is the applicant can choose anyone. It doesn't have to be the lowest bid. And then when we have a discussion with them, they explain why they chose this quote as opposed to another quote. So it not always the lowest quote, because we then take into consideration the homeowner made the decision. It all then comes back to the numbers. 10% of whatever quote is given is what we have authorization to give as tax credit.
Right, and that is a very good point.
We can certainly, I mean, if the case is continued, we'd certainly reach out to the applicant to tell them that was continued. And we can certainly share with them some of the comments and concerns of the HDC from the meeting to give them that opportunity to get that license number. And if they so choose, get another quote. But we'll leave that up to them, but we'll make them aware of it.
Can I jump in here? I mean, I think it's a good idea to have a minimum of 2 quotes, because, you know, the lowest bid might not have the expertise that somebody that, you know, charges a little more for something like this. So, yeah.
Yeah, and just
At least 2 quotes.
yeah, Christine, in the past too, when we've had these discussions, when we've asked for 2 quotes, there was a couple scenarios where we looked for them for additional context on the job, and or evaluating the nature of the company that was bidding. Sometimes there was a connection with the work site or something like that. So that was why we started asking and looking for it. But again, we're just, I think, trying to arrive at a place where we have a really consistent policy. So I think Aaron's earlier suggestion of, you know, our best practice is 2 quotes. And if there's an extenuating circumstance of why there isn't 2 quotes, the applicant should be prepared to explain that to us.
Okay, thank you everyone for that input. That was really valuable, a very valuable discussion. I feel we've got I'm learning some new information every time I join one of these calls. So it's always great to have some really knowledgeable people on the line. And thank you, Mark and Andrew, for guiding us in the right direction. Really appreciate that. There's no other items on this month's agenda. Did we want to, excuse me, did we have anything that we wanted to bring to the public? The next agenda item I have here is Historic District Commission and public comments. Did anyone have anything that they wanted to share with the group? Any historic relevance activities, events going on?
No.
Okay.
I know it was discussed, the Centennial Monument. I'm not sure if that's where you're leading the discussion towards, but I think the group at this point can certainly, as part of Historic District Commission comments, comment about that. It's just, I don't think really a vote is needed for it, but I think it's certainly, if you want to talk about it, this would be a good time to talk about it.
Okay, I wasn't sure if I was permitted to bring that up. I had sent that as over to Andrew, and I wasn't quite sure how it fell. So, but what Mark is talking about is the Recreation and Park Advisory Board is working with the Department of Recreation and Parks for the city of Westminster to develop a rededication ceremony for Belgrove Square. Essentially what happened is back last winter, there was an accident involving one of the monuments at that particular square. It was damaged. It went back out. It was removed and sent for repair. And it was the America's Centennial Monument, if I remember correctly. It was the 100-year anniversary of the Declaration of Independence. So, and it was a monument donated to the city of Westminster. It was a small monument, relatively small in size, but it brought a bigger discussion of how many monuments do we have around our city that are overlooked, and where is there a better place to put it? Is there something that we can do to draw attention to it? We have two monuments at Belgrove Square. One is the Centennial, one is the Bicentennial Monument. Should they be co-located in some way with some ornamental gardens? And those decisions were made previous to this month's discussion. But one of the Recreation and Park Advisory Board's tasks, and actually Kevin and Josh and myself all serve on that board. One of the things that they do as part of that board is try to increase community engagement for the Recreation and Parks Department, and try to find ways to advise their department in ways to better achieve that goal. So they came up with this pretty interesting idea of a Belgrove Square rededication ceremony, and that is going to take place in approximately 2 weeks on September 14th. And what they were asking for is if there was any ideas that the Historic District Commission would have. Just they're looking for informal input. They're not looking for any type of formal participation. They're not looking for any formal endorsements. They're going to proceed as they see best, but they thought in their best interest to engage us, the HDC, in order to see what our suggestions might be for how to better improve their event. So I'll leave that up to the group. Did anybody have any historically relevant ideas that they would like to share between this board and the other?
Well, I can just talk about, we did go out there with Kevin and Kristen on site when we were locating the monument to put it back in its location that it's at now. We already had an existing flower bed, and we thought it was a good location to kind of catty corner from the Bicentennial. We did look at co-location. It was just difficult when you take the posts and lights and everything out in that area. And also we felt that the location we put it in is the least active corner of Belgrove. As you can imagine, the light and the traffic signal right there at Green and I'm losing and can't remember.
Bond.
Thank you, Bond Street. So we thought getting out of that corner would be best. And the other thing we talked about was signage, that we were thinking about whether we get plaques for each individual monument. Do we get a single monument for the entire park itself? Because it's really the park that is the historical element. And then the Centennial, the monuments are basically gifts that are within the park. So is it one sign that talks about the park and then talks about the two monuments? So some of that discussion led to, would it make more sense at the time that we had the sign that at that moment, both that we would have this event versus just the Centennial Monument only. And then the other things we looked at or talked about were some of the more significant times when an event should occur. And, there are things like in May when the city first took the park was in May of 1877. And obviously July 4th when the city dedicated the monument in 1876. So does it make sense to have an event that ties into past events of the park? So again, this HDC and staff have been looking at this for some time. We found out about the Rex and Park Board after the fact, So we were a little confused that we had two commissions or committees doing the same thing. And I think we requested that maybe the best thing to do would have the two committees actually meet and communicate with each other and have a joint event. But again, it's just, it's really up to the committees at the end of the day. If the Rec and Parks Board want to have this event, they can certainly move forward with that event.
I kind of thought the Parks Recreation wanted the historic district to join in the celebration, and the two committees join together and do it together. That was my take.
That would certainly be beneficial. Yeah, obviously having a joint event would be, more participation from both committees would bring more ideas to the table, but I'm not sure how set in stone this particular event is. I don't know how far they are with planning. It seemed to me like nothing had been finalized yet. They had started, it sounded like it was in the serious phase, but the planning was not finalized. So I'm not entirely sure if it is a done deal or if it's something that we can raise to the Rec and Park Department and Advisory Board Chair. Would you be interested in pushing this back? Would you want to push, keep this forward? And I think there's also a health concern now. If you're tracking the numbers on the ongoing pandemic, things are not moving in the direction that we were hoping they would be at this time. So I think it's a very distinct possibility that if we don't do this event, if the Rec and Park committee does not do this event in 2 weeks, it would likely be postponed for at least 6 months. And at that point, if we're pushing it back to say the March timeframe, why not do it in May? Like Mark said, that's the anniversary of the park dedication. And that's it seems to be more prudent to line those two events up. But I will bring that back to the Rec and Park Advisory Chair, and I will have a discussion with her and see how she feels about that idea. If we want to do a joint event next May and kind of wait and see where this pandemic goes, or if they're so far along in the planning process that it would actually be a lot of wasted time to cut it right now and not do the event that they were discussing for 2 weeks. So I'll bring that back to that particular board, and we'll see what they decide. I'll make sure that I include Mark, Andrew, and the rest of the board members on what they say.
Thank you.
And if I can weigh in for just a moment, just to
Certainly.
state the obvious, 3 of the 4 commissioners, as pointed out in this meeting tonight, are on the other board. I don't know that we need to sync up. I think it's a matter of the city, different city representatives, just what they want to do, and we'll support it. So we're gung-ho for whatever the event is, and I think we're happy to wear both hats while we're there and hype whatever event ends up actually coming to pass.
Mhm. Yeah, and I think Josh, to your point, I think what my thoughts are is that because yourself, myself, and Kevin are on both committees, we should be doing something a little bit more to engage the city on both sides. That's my particular opinion, and we can discuss that further. But that's where we are right now. I'll take that back to their board and see how they feel about that. I'm making sure I'm wearing my HTC hat right now. So did anyone else have anything for the Historic District Commission this evening?
Just,
Aaron,
ahead.
can I just clarify my last comment there just a little bit? I
Mhm.
want to be perfectly clear here. That was not me trying to criticize anyone in the slightest. I just think we're all in agreement. We think this is a cool event. Let's go, let's support it, let's hype it up. But if there are any nuances to that discussion that we're not aware of, just let us know and we'll roll with it.
Yeah, and I apologize if it seemed like I took it that way. I did not take it that way, and I certainly hope that that wasn't that didn't come across that way to anyone else. I mean, we're all here because we love our city, right? So we all want to do what's best for Westminster, and that's really that's all we care about at the end of the day. That's it. Okay, I don't have anything else. There's nothing else on the agenda. Did anyone else have anything for the HDC for this meeting?
we did have a request to tear down a building in the historic district. I can't remember the address, Andrew. It's,
it's on East Main Street. I'm trying to remember.
if you're heading up East Main, it's on the right-hand side. It's a blue building. You've probably seen that it's tarped and looks like some windows have been replaced, but now the discussion is tearing down that building for some additional residential. There's no historic value to it. We did look at that. It's not referenced in the Weeks book. It's so there's nothing that essentially we could do anyway. If there was some significant value or historic value, could always ask them to document the building. So I just want, if you see a building going down, that's what's happened.
Okay,
Can I-
it's not federally registered.
No.
I have a question. So I'm not exactly sure. I'm trying to visualize where on Main Street that is. So fine, the building, okay, it doesn't have a historical significance, and they're gonna just tear it down. How can we, and this is one of the things that that interests me, is how can we guarantee that what is built is copacetic to like the downtown? Like, you don't want somebody just throwing something up with, I don't know, some ultra modern, whatever. You want it to blend with it. So what kind of guidelines do we have in the historic district? So somebody can't just throw up anything that they want to.
We do have a design preference manual that all development in the city is subject to. It really speaks more to downtown development. So if they do tear it down and redevelop, we will be ensuring at least that it meets that requirement. Planning Commission, they're charged to ensure that it meets design guidelines. So that's, staff will provide a lot of comments to hopefully to ensure that anything built is consistent with downtown look, material, bulk, size. So that would be part of the site process that the site would have to go through.
Am I able to have access to this manual, this guideline, the best practices? Can I see
Yes.
it? Yeah, okay,
We can send you a copy of that.
that'd be great. So it's not just suggestions, it's actual, like they have to comply.
It's it's been an unusual discussion that they're called guidelines, but the zoning ordinance states that the planning commission shall use the design preference manual, and any modifications require approval by the planning commission. So those two actions alone make it more than just a guideline. So that's why if you've noticed some of the architecture lately that's happening with new development, it's a little bit higher than what we've had in the past, because staff is really pushing that design manual along with the planning commission to get better architecture within the city.
So it's required. So if somebody says, I want to do whatever, and it's not in the guidelines, you can flag that and say, no, you cannot do that, right?
The planning commission will ultimately have to approve a modification to the design preference manual if they want to do something different than the preference manual. And we do bring that to the attention of the planning commission at the meeting, what they are lacking in that design preference manual.
And if I may add, when we have, for instance, a site development plan, and we do an extensive review of the building. And of course, residential property doesn't have the site development plan, but like for instance, a commercial property, commercial industrial, we really dive into that and we make sure that these are the things that you're not complying with in the development design preference manual. And then we send, as part of our comment response letter, all that information back to them for them to address. And if they don't address that to our satisfaction, that's when it goes to the Planning and Zoning Commission.
Okay. All right. I would be very interested in getting a copy of that guidebook or to
Yeah,
see what that
absolutely.
is, because it sounds kind of loosey-goosey to me, but I'm not familiar with it, so I would like to see it and.
We'll send it out
I think
to,
your guideline, the guidelines are here.
yeah, we'll send it out to the whole group too. We'll send it out to everybody in the HDC so they can have it and take a look at it.
Can I make a suggestion? Can the address be forwarded to us via an email, Andrew, so we are aware of it before the city gives permission
Yeah.
to tear down? Just so we are aware of it in case somebody who knows we are on the commission asks us about it. I think is more positive we know of it than us not knowing of it.
And when I send out the email with the link to the development design preference manual, I can also include that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's a good idea for us not to get, this commission to be on the tail end of it when, maybe things are signed off on. And then we know about it later, but then it's too late to do anything about it. I mean, I think I think that's the commission's job to be able to police that in a way, for lack of a better term. So.
When I joined this commission, I was told pretty expressly that we don't police such things and that there wasn't a lot of enforcement apparatus at our fingertips. But, if that's a developing situation and there are other guidelines, I mean, I would love to see these guidelines as well. So I'm very glad that they're being sent out. And if that is information that is germane to future work of this group, I think it definitely merits more conversation. Again, Andrew and Mark, we defer to you, but I think that very well may tie into future discussion and planning for the vision for this group's responsibilities.
Yeah, and Josh, I remember that conversation. I think it was you and me both had that conversation with Dean back when he was on the board. We were asking about a particular property, I believe it was the old firehouse, that they wanted to repaint. And we said, do we have any particular way of enforcing what color they choose? I mean, can they just paint it yellow if that's what they want to do? And there are guidelines that say, if you're improving a property that's already existing, it has to, we cannot tell them, unless it's federally registered historic property, we cannot tell them what they are and are not allowed to do in terms of personal taste. That was my understanding from the conversation we had with Dean, was if they choose to paint their house yellow, even though it's not historically accurate, that's their choice and they won't be approved for that tax credit. And if they choose to, replace a window with a vinyl window instead of a wood window, then we may or may not approve that tax credit. But it sounds to me like, Mark, if I'm understanding you correctly, that there's going to be some different rules that apply to new construction. This building's going to be ripped down, and then they're going to put a new building in its place that has to follow certain guidelines in terms of appearance and architecture. If I'm understanding correctly.
That's correct.
Okay.
Could we have a
So-
discussion about like existing, like I have a property downtown or a house or something in the historic district, and I know it's my understanding that they're historic properties, but there's not a historic district.
Mhm.
Can we have a discussion about that? Because, I mean, if somebody decides to, they own property in downtown Westminster, especially downtown Westminster, and they decide to do whatever they want to do, if we can't enforce guidelines, what's the purpose of this commission?
Christine, let's talk about East Middle School after this meeting. How about that?
Pardon me? The-
East Middle School, there's a whole thing going on with that. But anyway, Andrew, it sounds like you've been wanting to talk about something.
If I may, there is a local historic zoned district. However, in the city of Westminster, there's only 2 properties with that zoning designation. So for instance, several years ago, maybe 4 years ago, Dean Camlin came in with an application to do some exterior work to his building on East Main Street, and that had to be approved by the Historic District Commission. Now there's his building on, or his former building on East Main Street, and then there's another building on Pennsylvania Avenue. And Kevin, you probably remember that discussion many years ago.
So, yeah, so anything in that district, if they were going to alter it in any way, it would have to come before the commission, the Historic Commission.
Okay,
Not in that district, only exactly 2 properties.
Just
But-
those 2 registered properties.
Yeah, they're the only ones that are zoned historic district. Everything else is located within the defined downtown Westminster Historic District, but they're not zoned historic district, and therefore they aren't subject to those same regulations.
okay, well,
So Christine,
That's-
to kind of reassure you, and this actually predates my appointment to this board, but to reassure you that this board does actually have a purpose, and the purpose is to work with the community as a whole. For example, and this is one that we will reference for quite some time because it seems very relevant to what we do. So when the energy company was replacing everybody's home meters with smart meters, those smart meters require an external antenna to be located within certain amounts of distance within that meter, which is how it communicates to the satellites, gets internet connection, and goes back to their home base. Those antennas that company originally wanted to produce were unsightly. They were horrific. They would have had what we call a negative visual impact to the Historic Commission. And because of that, they brought it to us, and they said, this is what we want to do. We said, we don't believe that this is best cohesively fitting within our community. Can we find a different solution that would work well with our historic district and still accomplish the needs that you have? So they went back to their drawing board. They proposed a different style of antenna that has a much more minimalist look. And because of that, so if you imagine the initial proposal being, if you remember the really old from the 1980s home television satellite dishes, those 4-foot wide dishes, on top of a telephone pole, versus just a basically slimline pole. There's one. They're all over the city. You probably never see them because they blend in with the existing infrastructure. They're just very thin, it's a vertical pole, and it's a little bit of a bulb at the top, but it's very minimal in terms of what they were originally proposing. So the company worked with us and the city, and we found a mutual solution that worked for everyone, and it has a minimal impact, which is exactly what we were hoping to achieve. Andrew, did you have something you wanted to input?
And just to add to that, by law, the Federal Communications Commission, under a Section 106 review, that has to come to the local historic district for review. And for instance, I think the FCC there's also a 2-mile radius. So for instance, if a tower is located anywhere within that 2-mile buffer of the city limits, we would be notified of that.
So we do have a purpose in terms of community improvement. We engage with, I mean, gosh, I think the first 6 meetings I had here were all about antennas going on top of that water tower on McDaniel. So we do what we can to make sure that the historic fabric and appearance and the charm that we can have in this particular community is maintained as best as we can. We can't enforce, we cannot penalize a homeowner for changing something about their home unless it's one of those two properties that Mark mentioned. They have to follow much stricter guidelines, but everybody else that lives within that historic district, we want to work with them. We don't want to go over and finger wag and say, this isn't right, you shouldn't do this. Because a lot of times we work with property owners that, you know, will paint their property a color that may not be historically accurate, but it does improve the community a lot. There's been a repeat business owner on these commissions that has done a fantastic job of restoring his properties. And we really applaud him for the effort he's making on improving Westminster as a whole. And that's really what we do. It sounds like it's not important, but it actually is. It's very important to make sure that we're working with the community, raise awareness for this tax credit, the application that you saw tonight. These are very common, these types of tax credit requests. People who want to do an improvement to their property that does follow a historic fabric, that is within that historic district, they can receive a certain amount of that back in terms of tax compensation. So we want to make sure that we're working with our community members to do that. Go ahead, Andrew, Mark, you had some input.
And also, if a new, just to throw in there, if let's say a new building was to come onto our historic Main Street in the historic zone, there is also a 5% tax credit for new buildings. So for existing buildings, you have the 10% like that was in front of you all today. But for historically new buildings that blend in with the historic character of Westminster, there's a 5% tax credit to help offset the costs of building new or building with, just to offset the higher costs for more historic fabric that would tend to cost more.
So I understand. So, I mean, that the tax credits are all good. It's a good thing. But the bottom line is suggestions and guidelines, but no teeth for the historic district.
I think that's exactly how it was put to us.
Okay.
And
All
I
right,
think
well,
you raise a valuable point, Christine, and you're not the first to raise it. And, maybe there is some discussion to be had with
we have a
city
discussion
council and the mayor and all the other powers that be about, could there be more teeth at some point to help with some of the concerns that you're very rightly pointing out. I personally will go on record saying I am in favor of such a discussion. I think that there are some things that we could be doing to celebrate and enhance the appearance of our town and its historic charm and character. And if there's anything that we as a group can do to help emphasize that and exhort that beyond just tax credits, as much as I appreciate the tax credits, I would be solidly in favor of this group exploring those options.
Yep.
Hi guys, I'm sorry I'm late. It's Chris McMasters. How are you?
Doing well. How are you?
Good. Are we official or
We
was
are.
my accent caused us to be not official?
Nope. We've been conducting the meeting, and I sat in your seat. You left some big shoes to fill, but I tried to do my best.
I'm so glad. Keep going.
But Andrew, if I recall correctly, there's an effort to enforce signage, corporate signage standards throughout the city within the historic district. Is that correct?
Well, especially in the historic district, and signage all over the city. I mean, that's one of the big I guess issues I get in with a lot of people is better signage for the city, especially in the historic zone. So for instance, even let's take in the city in general, and monument signs for the most part are not allowed in the historic zone, but we try to push monument signs in the city that it's not like the normal, popsicle sign, the big pole on the top, the big pole with the sign on the top, monument signs to make the city look better. But for downtown, there's also standards in the standards for renovation Westminster that there's a whole level of signage, sign regulations for downtown in the central business zone.
If I could real quick, we are moving forward with updating the sign section of the zoning ordinance. We've created a sign ordinance work group. We're going to start meeting with them because, again, our ordinance could be argued or stated that it's unconstitutional. But as Andrew mentioned, downtown does have additional regulations for signage that are they're subject to. The issue that we have, to be quite honest, is that I'd say it's more of an education issue, that most of the businesses downtown are unaware of the fact that you need a sign permit for a sign. And there's an application and a process that's approved and it has to meet certain standards. So we are also looking at meeting with downtown businesses and trying to start up the downtown business partnership again, as Josh is fully aware of, to have more discussions about some of these regulations and how do we go about trying to bring people into conformance. I certainly don't want to go out and start citing people in downtown. That's not my role, and I don't like doing that. I'd like to work with people and educate them and how they come into conformance. So that is something on our list as well.
So these standards that you're talking about are actually enforceable. So if I'm a business owner and I say, I want to put up, this kind of sign.
Yes.
You say no, because this, that, or the other thing. Okay.
Yes,
So you
exactly.
actually can enforce it. Okay.
Yes. So if somebody's not in compliance, if we received a complaint, we would meet with that person and again, try to come into compliance. If not, we can always cite that property to come into compliance. But again, my role, and I believe, as a government, we should work with people to come into compliance and help them. So again, that is on our list as part of the sign rewrite.
Yeah.
And we can send you that too. I'm not sure if you were provided that as well, the rehabilitation guidelines that lists requirements of downtown Westminster as well as signage requirements. It also has structure and building requirements.
Yep, it's the standards for renovation Westminster.
Yeah, the signs are just a part of that.
Yes,
Yeah.
chapter 3 is the signs. Yep.
And frankly, we just updated that a year or two ago, didn't we, Andrew?
Yes, I think back in 2018.
Yeah, it was not that long ago. Did you cover demolition permits?
We talked a little bit about that. I guess to elaborate more on that is if a demolition permit comes in, if it's a historic significant building, the property owner per code is required to meet with the city to see if there's any things that we can do to save the structure and explain historic taxes and different things like that, and what financial benefits that are out there to save that historic structure. But if not, like Mark mentioned a little while ago, they would, if there's no resolution, they would have to document it with photographs for the archives.
So for clarification, Andrew, excuse me, for clarification, somebody has a historically significant structure downtown. You meet with them there, but they are intent on tearing it down. You can't say, no, you can't tear it down. They can still tear it down. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes, they can. But the one thing is that we should probably get sharper on is that in the past, when there's been tear downs, the actual regulations of what kind of level of documentation that needs to happen has not been applied. And I hope I don't step on any toes, but it hasn't been applied evenly from the city. When St. Paul's UCC took down the Royer House for a parking lot, no, actually it was for another building. They were handed really old regulations, and therefore they handed in very, very poor documentation. And we didn't get an opportunity to review that documentation until a day before the demolition contract was to start. And when we pointed out the deficiencies in the documentation, I mean, some of it was literally fantasy. All they said is, well, this is what the city gave us. This is what we're going to do. And that's what happened the next day. So we really need to get a little sharper, because when Grace Lutheran took down their parsonage, we made sure that a professional historic preservation architect did the full documentation, full photos in archival quality, profiles and room views of every room. I mean, it was completely documented. But then when Grace came along a few years, when St. Paul's UCC came along a few years later, they didn't have that same guidance, and they didn't hire anybody. They just had a guy kind of walk through the rooms.
That's an excellent idea. Maybe that should be part of the requirement, that you want to tear down a something that's deemed historically significant, you must get a professional to document it. And, you know, just has to be part of the
Evidence.
Well, it just wasn't well communicated to our last demo permit.
but it doesn't sound like it's required though.
It is required.
It is required.
That
Okay.
it be documented, but the problem is that the documentation guidelines were not the most modern in rehab and rehabilitation standards by the Park Service. So
Then maybe that needs to be updated. So it requires a professional to document. What I'm saying is, if it's deemed historically significant, then maybe a professional needs to do it, not just anybody. Just taking
Exactly.
pictures,
Well-
right? So maybe that needs to be updated.
yeah, the way the
Make a
Park Service
requirement.
puts its requirements is, they don't say who you have to hire, but they say it has to be up to certain standards.
Right.
And frankly, unless you're a professional, you're never going to meet those standards.
Right.
Fortunately, the last demo permit was able to say the standards you held us to were from like 1972 or something, when they just weren't mature like they are today. They weren't the current standards. And you know, we never were able to clarify with city staff exactly, you know, who bumbled that football at the finish line, you know. It should be super clear before anyone even contemplates demo that there's going to be a cost to that. You got to get it well done. You probably have to have a CRM company come in and do the work. And, you know, a minimal kind of package is usually $5 to $10 grand. And that might make some people think twice also in their planning, like, ooh, it's going to cost us this much just to document the demo. And then the actual cost of the demo and the remediation of any kind of hazardous materials may tip the scales towards preservation.
No, I think it's a great idea.
But it's something that needs to be kind of clarified within our own regs as far as demo permits go, to make sure that it's clear that it's the most recent Park Service standards that we stick by. Yeah, we've talked in the past about getting more teeth, but when I joined the Historic District Commission 20 years ago, the big fear was that we would become like Uniontown, where we actually regulated paint colors and really alienated an awful lot of people. And a couple of times we tried over the years to talk about a little more teeth in the regulations. But every time we've had a council that has felt that anything more restrictive would also be of, you know, damage to our business community and damage to being able to market ourselves as a vibrant historic you know, destination. So over the years, it's just been one of these things where we kind of test the waters and then retreat. You know?
That's interesting, because I've not served on a commission like this before, but I've worked in conjunction with another one. But that had a ton of teeth. And when you bought a house or property in the historic district, you were told that when you bought it, before you bought it, that you need to comply by these. You know, there were funds to help you. You know, nobody cared what you did inside. but on the facade, you needed to comply, whether it was your home or a business. And it's vibrant downtown. So and it didn't alienate anybody. In fact, people are drawn to the town. So I don't think that, I don't think it's going to alienate people. I think you just need to educate people about it and, put some teeth into things. You can't have everybody just do what they want to do all the time.
Yeah, the hard part is you've diagnosed it correctly. We've always been just a candy no stick organization, and there's very few historic districts in the state that operate that way. I think Hyattsville may operate that way, but I'm not entirely sure. Almost all the rest of them have pretty strict standards for any kind of exterior changes. And when I work with the Historical Trust, they rarely talk about the inside unless it's a feature that helped contribute to the property becoming part of a certified structure. So there are a couple of buildings in Westminster that have significant fireplaces that are mentioned in the historic district summaries that were done. And so those items would be something that could be protected because they're called out within the documentation. I think in my mind, one of the hardest things is our documentation is just so stinking old. We're rounding up on 50 years old. And over the years, I've looked into ways of updating our documentation. And the rub is that if we want to update within our historic district and add some houses that weren't considered historic before when they were surveyed, or add additional information to the actual district nomination, the rules about acceptance of historic districts have gone up several fold since the 1970s when we first talked about it. In the 70s, you could kind of opt in or opt out, and those people who were vehemently against being in a historic district could say so, and their addresses were dropped. Today, those people may be dead, they may have moved on, the structure itself still has some integrity and could be included. But today, the Historic Trust now looks at districts as a sort of an all or nothing move. And you can't really get a district listed unless 95, 99% of the people all agree they want to be listed. And you can't change the interior of a district by a few properties. You have to resubmit the entire district. So we'd have to go back to all the landowners, all 1,400 of them, and see if they agree to being relisted on a federal registry. And it's just, in most communities, it freaks them out, you know? They just say, I don't want to be on any federal registry. And I've been cautioned several times by the Historic Trust to not even think along those ways because people just don't, it just doesn't happen. What can happen are some additions can be put on. Parcels that are outside of a historic district but have enough integrity to warrant their own small district can be amended to ours. And then we could just go to the council and say, can we offer tax credits to these additional parcels in a different Westminster historic district? An easy slam dunk would be Roop's Mill. It's its own historic district. It's technically within the city. And it's basically adjacent, I think, or close enough to our historic district that we could go to council and say, this is another historic property we would like to protect and offer historic tax credits to.
So I think being proactive also, again, I'm new to this. I'm familiar with other historic district commissions in other towns, and that I'm either familiar with or worked with. So I don't know all the ins and outs of this particular, again, I'm still learning, but you know, can we be more proactive then in going out to, especially downtown business owners and saying, look, here's what's available to you. And I know that's probably there if they go and they seek that information, but a lot of people don't do that. You know?
So in the past, we have put into the sewer bill announcements to check at our website, announcements about educational opportunities. I've also taught classes to real estate folks because they're always needing credits and trying to, get into the classes for the Westminster real estate folks. They're usually offered at the college. We've also offered community presentations to Westminster's Historic District Commission and tax credits that are available. The last time we did it, we literally had one guy that I waved in from the sidewalk attend. It was well publicized, but just nobody showed up.
Maybe a door-to-door campaign next time.
Most recently in May, I did a talk for the Maryland, for the Historical Society. And I sent the link to you, Andrew. I don't know if you managed to link it to our webpage, but at least it's a good 45-minute presentation aimed at your average homeowner as to how to do our historic tax credits. And that is a tool that any city person or any one of us can pass around to people who might have some interest in applying for tax credits.
If I may, I apologize. I have to go put my kids to bed, so I need to duck out. But let me just echo, I think that this would be a really great discussion for us to be had. And if I may ask Andrew and Mark to just prep us a little bit ahead of our next meeting of what would need to happen for us to think about expanding the scope or improving our outreach, or anything from the city side that should inform our brainstorming in the future, I think would be really valuable. And maybe we could even invite Mayor Becker to attend a future brainstorming meeting. And I will note, just on a purely editorial note, Uniontown's decision may have been controversial at the time, but it is the hottest neighborhood in Westminster, some would argue, and it is very beloved. Houses sell almost instantly, and the people I know who live there adore it fervently. So I'm not saying we need to go to their level of control, but I think to Christine's point, there's probably some more that we could be doing and being creative about. So again, apologize, I have to run, but thanks everyone, and appreciate the discussion this evening.
On Josh's comment, I want to share, maybe you all don't know, but for 20 years I was on Carroll County Historic District, and we were in charge of Uniontown. And part of me says it was always perceived to be protective and rigid, but it wasn't always rigid, and people did whatever they wanted to do. And it all comes back to like the city regulations. Unless someone calls them out and informs us as Carroll County Historic District, we knew nothing about so-and-so replace windows. So it is all, we had, how do I say this? If they did it, we had no recourse to say you could do it, and didn't have the meat to make them remove it and do it over. So I think we are a commission only to educate, and we are only as good as the education we provide.
I agree, Kevin, I agree. In the past, whenever we've got to be up our bonnets about increasing our stick, what we've done is we've approached the county commissioners on a one-to-one basis in a fairly quiet way of just sort of taking the temperature of the pool, you know? And we've just never had the votes and the temperature, to be honest. You know, you can tell this stuff before it becomes public as to whether or not this is going to be well received by the council or whether it's going to be interpreted as overly restrictive and, you know, heavily, you know, regulated by city staff. And there just never has been an indication in the quiet talks we've had that that was something that was going to be welcomed. So I went to the city commission, how many years ago was that, Kevin, with an information package? I just really felt that it was a good time to try again to get more sticks, as you might say. And we prepared an information package. I might even still have a copy of it somewhere, but it was a, you know, a full package of our rehab standards, of the map of the historic district. It was meant to be an education for the commission itself. And we had some major tear down or demolition, and we asked them, you know, can you help us brainstorm? And we got like zero traction on that. So again, you know, we want to remain seen as of use to the mayor and certainly of use to the common council, and to be a reference for things that need to be done. I get a lot of calls about, you know, the clock or Belgrove Square or whatever. So I want to remain seen as folks who are really helpful and folks who have resources and know how to get things done. But I can see where there's always got to be an opportunity to check the water and see, hey, are we recognizing that our historic resources are slowly slipping away, door by door, window by window, facade by facade, and that, you know, these things are irreplaceable. It's a bank of only so many resources, and as they get frittered away for this reason or that, it's a loss, and it's a loss to the entire community. Can I ask something kind of selfish here? Did you guys talk about the request I put in for work on my house?
We did actually, and Mark helped guide me through the process of making sure that we were following the guidelines for the approval process. And apparently the approval process is contingent on the applicant being present at the meeting. So our recommendation was to continue this discussion at the next HDC meeting. Can we revisit that, Mark, Andrew? What are the guidelines on that? Can we go back and have an additional discussion, just raise our points to Kristen while she's on the line?
You can give me advice, I think. I'm happy to wait for an official decision till next month because the state will take 2 months. So
Okay.
Rather than revisiting any decisions, but if you have any pointers I need to know to sharpen up my paperwork, I'm happy for that.
Okay, I think the two concerns that we had was one, there didn't seem to be any official license number on the invoice that was included from the name of the company escapes me, but the contractor that was cited.
Jeff Richardson.
Yes, thank you.
Is that required?
I don't know if it's required, but it was one of the suggestions that the board, the committee had made, was to see if there is a license number that can be provided.
So we usually don't require that. If there's a requirement for it, certainly I'll provide it, but this is painting. So as far as I know, no licensing is required.
Okay, the other suggestion we had was to get a second quote. Typically in the past, when we've had applicants, we usually ask them to to get at least one additional quote, just so we have an idea of, is it really this much, or is it more than they consider, and they're just not, they're not doing all of the work involved. We understand that your expertise would lend credence to not getting a second quote, but that's just, we just want to make sure that we're enforcing the guidelines, our own standards that we've asked of other people in the past, that we're asking that of all people in the future.
Again, I'm a little surprised. I've never asked anyone for a second quote. So if you can show me where that's a requirement, I'm more than happy to do that. I've already tried to get 2 other quotes, by the way, and were turned down on both requests. And it's taken me 1.5 years to get this far. But if there is a requirement for second quotes, I'm happy to go get one.
Well, I think that was part of the reasons why we had wanted to make sure you were on the call, because we did mention that if there was a circumstance where only 1 quote could be acquired, as the circumstance you just mentioned, contractors turning down the work, maybe it's too complicated, maybe they're just not going to make enough profit, maybe there's they don't have the expertise, maybe it's taking too long, maybe they don't have the supplies in stock, and with the pandemic going on, I'm sure that's been more common than in more recent months. But
Yeah, no, my difficulty is to really go back before the pandemic.
If I could, I don't have the issue of Aaron just providing basic update, but I don't think we should have back and forth discussion about the application that
I agree.
continues. So
Let's wait. Let's continue that discussion next month in a more official capacity.
All right, well, but in the meantime, if there is a requirement for a second quote, I'd love to see where that is.
Okay.
Because
will-
if it is a written requirement somewhere,
again,
I
Chris,
haven't been enforcing it.
I prefer we don't talk about that. It's, if we could just move on. And Chris, staff will certainly reach out to you.
That would be great, because I would take the opportunity to find a second quote if it's written and I have somehow not noticed it all these years.
All right.
And I have nothing else for tonight.
Okay. All right. If no one has anything else, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So be it.
Kevin makes the motion. Do I hear a second?
I want to thank everybody so much. I give you a second.
Thank you.
I'm so sorry to have not been at the helm tonight.
All right. I may have been on the ship, but it was really Andrew and Mark that kept it afloat. So thank you, gentlemen, for all of your help. Really appreciate that.
Well, that's the secret. It's true that every month. It's the way it always works.
All right, thank you all, everybody. Motion to adjourn approved. Everyone have a great month, and we'll touch base next month. Thank you.
Everyone, thank you.